Morning, everybody, and welcome to the Alicia Mackay Show on today, Friday, the 22nd of July. It is 8 o'clock in the morning, and I am in Wellington. I'm not very pleased about this. Cam, where am I supposed to be this morning?
You're meant to be in Auckland on a fun adventure with your daughter going to see a concert.
Yes, I am. So I am a victim. That's right, a victim. Of the travel crisis that is currently sweeping Aotearoa. We had 130 flights cancelled yesterday. They've already cancelled 12 in and out of Wellington this morning. Air New Zealand is justifiably freaking out because not only have we had storms, they've also got a bunch of staff off with COVID. It is school holidays. There are people stranded at opposite ends of the country. It is going to take them a number of days to figure out what to do about the travel backlog they've currently got. They're hoping a lot of people credit their flights and decide that their travel's not that urgent. The very helpful man who rang me 2 hours after waiting for 2 hours from Air New Zealand yesterday, he said, well, we can definitely fly you on the Saturday probably. It was definitely and probably in the same sentence. I said, that is good. The concert is on Friday night though, so that would be less useful. So anyway, what's really exciting is that I'm not in Auckland on a fun trip with my 16-year-old daughter and her two friends and my girlfriend and her children. No, I'm not. I'm instead still in Wellington where it is raining and delightful.
And windy.
And I don't have any ceilings. So I do in this room. So that's been a good time. But I just want you to spare another thought for me this morning because I got up to make a coffee and I thought, do you know what? I deserve a milky coffee this morning. I deserve it. I'm tired. I'm ready for a coffee. And there's no milk.
Yeah, in terms of the scale of the fiasco that we're suffering right now, I think not having any milk for coffee is right up there with people missing important flights.
Yeah, I know. It's not easy. And so the good news is that my ex-husband has valiantly offered to drive these three girls to Auckland today. And so they're off. Can't see any problems happening there. I'm sure that will go perfectly fine. And it did remind me, Callum, of a trip that you and I went on maybe 5 years ago. Do you remember the circumstances of this trip by any chance?
I certainly do. It was eerily similar. We had cancelled flights, we had concert tickets, we had a snap decision to make, and we did choose to get in the car. But what was the outcome of that?
Well, off we were to the Queens of the Stone Age concert that we were heading to in Auckland from Wellington. And we did make a snap decision. I said to CV, look, get on the train. We were out here in Whitby. CV was in town. I said, CV, get on the train. We'll pick you up from the train station. We're going to throw the children in the car and drive to Auckland. And all going well, we will make it on time. And then I've got this flashback to sitting in South Taranaki in front of a stretch of road where a bunch of trees had come down in the storm. And thinking we're not moving for some time yet. So after spending approximately 12 hours in the car with three adults and two children, one of whom I believe was 1 or 2 at that point, Harriet, we did not make it to the concert, did we?
What was the ratio of hours driven to concert hours attended? Well, you didn't make it at all, so I suppose the ratio doesn't exist. But how many hours were you in the car?
A lot.
Yeah,
like 12?
So we slowed down when it was no longer possible. Like we stopped rushing when it was no longer possible to make the concert. But it's interesting to me. Do you have any highlights of that trip?
Yeah, I've got 2. First highlight, I believe, was you playing Chicken Little on your laptop to Bailey and Harriet, who were at that point, I believe, aged 11 and 1 or 11 and 2. Second highlight is stopping at Cobb & Co, New Plymouth, for an overpriced, not very good meal packed full of child nostalgia.
Absolute shout out to the remaining Cobb & Co's dotted across New Zealand for their nostalgia factor, and that's about it, really.
Well, they've tried to rebrand and be like, we're actually a family restaurant where you can pay $28 for a meal and be quite happy with it. And they have got the $28 a plate things down. Unfortunately, what they've not backed it up with, it seems, is quality of food and dining experience. So all you're doing is just paying more and then getting the little plastic animal on your traffic light.
Well,
what a reward that is.
Let's give them
I think that, so the thing that came up for me was that there's a point in everyone's life where the amount of time you're willing to drive to go to a concert drops off. Like when you're in your teen years, early 20s, maybe hanging out with the uni mates, you will quite willingly drive to another city some distance away just to go to a gig. And the thought of that is exciting and fun. Like, you cannot wait to do that. It is such a good adventure. And then at some point at different ages for different people, you're like, don't think I'm even going to go into town for this one.
That's right.
So I had a set of mates at uni who drove from Melbourne to Byron Bay, which, like, in pure driving hours is about 30 hours. And they did it just to buy a kebab. One of the dudes was like, the best kebab I've ever eaten is in Byron Bay. And they got into a drunken argument or discussion, animated discussion, so we say, on a Friday night. And the next day, 4 of them piled into a car, drove to Byron Bay for a kebab, and then drove home again.
Yeah, I like that. I drove 3 days once for big day out, and then another 3 days home, and regret nothing. But you're quite right. I'd seriously debate whether I can drive 20 minutes in the rain into town for a gig these days, because, quite frankly, age makes you tired. But it did also...
Well, there's also the thing where when you're driving there, you're full of excitement and fun. So I'm not. There's a window of overlap in the middle for most people where the drive there is tolerable and the drive back is not. Did they all drop off at the same time for you?
Yeah.
CD, when was the last time you did a big roadie?
Well, so I was going to say the pinnacle of that format is when you drive a long way to the gig in a van with the band. That is the king of that format. That's fun. That is a lot of fun.
Have you done that?
I did that. Some mates of mine were playing when I lived in Dunedin. They were playing at the Penguin Club in Oamaru, which is a great venue. And yeah, we all hopped in their van and went to the gig. They wanted a bit of a renter crowd, so we just packed everyone we could into that van and we bought that crowd.
Great format.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
That sounds like one that you could still do. How long's the drive from Dunedin to Oamaru?
About an hour and a half.
Yeah, mate, I'd still do that.
Yeah, that would be fine.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that would be fine. But it did get me thinking, because I just assumed that this flight disruption thing was going to be like a yesterday problem, and maybe a yesterday and today problem. But I was reading this morning the comments from a desperately trying to keep cool, but clearly not keeping very cool, Air New Zealand chief executive, about how many days it's going to take them to correct the travel backlog. And it got me starting to think about some of the things that we just, despite not having them for very long, immediately take for granted, whether it's technology or life conditions or whatever it is. So Cam and I are both traveling to Auckland on different days next week for work things, and realizing, maybe I can't just travel hundreds of kilometers in a few minutes. That will be mildly inconvenient. Got me thinking about some of the other things that we just completely take for granted and our life crumbles without. And
like milk.
Like milk. The travel one's funny because we didn't have it for quite a long time, quite recently. And just immediately now are like, well, obviously if I can't get a flight, my whole week's ruined. Even though we couldn't really travel consistently.
Yeah, privilege
for 2
to
years.
Complacency is a short jump, isn't it?
It's a short ratio. And then I was thinking, so last week I left my phone in town for a couple of days, which was absolutely delightful, by the way. It was mildly inconvenient, but absolutely wonderful not to have a phone for a couple of days. However, one thing I noticed was, because the batteries in my watch are flat, a distinct lack of time. I had no time, which was mostly fine because it was pretty much weekend. And so the time becomes exact time becomes less salient in the weekend. But I didn't know what time it was for much of the day. And like, what do you do without knowing the time?
Probably miss appointments, but if you don't have any, it doesn't really matter, does it?
Well, no, but then I got thinking, what would life be like if none of us had any time? How would we get by? Wouldn't it be marvelous?
How far did you take the scenario? Are we living on like subsistence farming?
Why would we be living on subsistence farming? We're just turning up when we feel like it. It's great.
Do you have a calendar? Or is it just
that's a good
time
question.
during the day?
Oh, this is a beautiful segue. So we went on a bit of roadie out of town the other day just for something to do, and we went to the Stonehenge exhibit near Martinborough. And I can tell you now that Alicia is fully equipped if she was turned out into a field with nothing but a bulldozer and a bunch of rocks. She could tell you the winter solstice, the vernal equinox.
Yeah.
You'd know when Pisces was rising. You certainly would know when the Matariki public holiday should be.
Yeah, and planets. I know a lot about planets now. Planets, suns, moons, time, shadows, acoustics. I'm right across it. I've been to Stonehenge, Aotearoa. It is, honestly, for those of you in the Wellington region who haven't made a pilgrimage out to Stonehenge, it is genuinely great. It is very, very cool. They have acoustic illusions where you clap and shout and it sounds like there are dozens or hundreds of people echoing you. They've poured an incredible amount of effort into building a perfectly accurate structure that will tell you all of the equinox and solstices and star signs, and it's genuinely amazing. I loved it.
Yeah, genuinely cool thing to do. In random other news from across the ditch, there was a strange pink glow in the sky over the rural town of Mildura in Australia.
I'm going to Mildura.
You're going to Mildura,
Yeah.
and that's what made me think about it. And so there was a glow in the sky well beyond sunset, confusing the locals, and people were taking photos and calling
Aliens.
aliens. There was a lot of alien speculation, as happens whenever there's a mysterious, unexplained glow. Turns out someone at the cannabis factory, the first legal cannabis factory in Victoria, had accidentally left the roof open, and the lights that they use to grow hydroponic dope are quite red, apparently. And usually you close the lid at night, and because of someone forgetting to do that and some low-hanging cloud, huge, massive, alien-like, weird pink glow. And the councillor was like, didn't really know what was going on, fielding some pretty weird questions. And then I remembered that the cannabis factory was out there.
That's one of those moments where life just becomes a cartoon, and you're like, well, if someone wrote that like as a one-liner or a joke or something, that's just a bit lame, but that's amazing.
That is so great. And they have a cannabis factory?
Well, yeah, I don't exactly know why it's in Mildura. Maybe the growing conditions are right there. They're obviously not that good because they need like alien-powered red hydroponic lights to get the thing to work. But yeah, the spokesman for the company, the Can Group, is the company that grows the medicinal marijuana. And Reese Cohen said it was a completely normal activity. Someone just forgot to close the roof. There was nothing out of the ordinary going on at all. So anyone near a cannabis factory, leave the roof open to entertain the locals.
I like that a lot. A good mate of mine had a family member staying with them who was known to occasionally have a habit of growing things for himself that required colourful lights. And this friend of mine is also quite a keen vegetable gardener, and he was putting in extra lights in his greenhouse out the back, in his glass house where he grows all his tomatoes year round. And as his family member was moving out, he said, I've actually got like a few LEDs, like quite good high-powered grow lights in the garage. Do you want to borrow a couple and just put them in your glass house, like to say thanks for letting me stay for the last couple of weeks? And he's like, oh yeah, that would be good. It never clicked that they would likely be alien lights. And so now a good friend of mine growing his very innocent tomatoes and spinach and other things in his glass house has purple glowing orb coming from his backyard.
Well, geez, I hope that's the right colour on the spectrum for growing vegetables. I read in this article that it's specifically for marijuana.
Yeah, no, what you need for grow lights, this is coming from a houseplant perspective, is you need full spectrum light. So you need red, green and blue, and it changes throughout the day. And even though it might look white or purple or red, it's actually full spectrum. And
you have a suspicious amount of knowledge about this topic. Is there anything
What do you
from your
think?
childhood that you Okay.
What do you think that was like for that officer who went round to sort of check? Because what he or she has been tasked with is investigating aliens, and instead what they find is just a simple, innocent and legal industrial amount of marijuana. That's a strange day for a police officer.
Well, my understanding of what it's like being a police officer in a rural town is that you're basically having coffees and being friendly with people, and then someone dies. Like that's the reason it usually makes the TV. So
the occasional zombie. What's that great film for the greater good? What's that film, CB?
I don't know.
You know, with the zombies, and they're like, for the greater good.
Oh, the sequel to Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah, what is
The
it?
other one.
You know,
Well,
for
you don't know
our
either.
in-house, no, but you're the movie guy. You're the in-house film critic. Now, for those of you who've not seen the Elvis movie, possibly don't, although the actor who plays Elvis is absolutely amazing. He's exceptional. We love him so much. He's such a babe. Holy shit. But overall, as a film, bit odd.
It was basically a collection of really good segments put together and held together with a poorly cast Tom Hanks doing a terrible job of the accent and not being a particularly useful film device.
Yeah, but my daughter loved it, so maybe you've got mediocre taste in movies too, listening public, and you will also enjoy it. Or maybe you did enjoy it and you're currently feeling personally attacked, in which case I do apologise.
A lot of them will be. It's very divisive.
So am I.
Well, with no better segue than that, let's get into something else.
Good.
What I want to do over the course of a few podcasts is actually go through the greatest hits of one of my favorite authors of all time, Terry Pratchett. We've touched on this before. Regular viewers might remember the substition section that we're still puzzling over. So please do send in your substitions on an ongoing basis. But given that we had... Oh, thank you, James. Shaun of the Dead. Hot Fuzz. Hot Fuzz.
Yeah, I mix my movies up. Sorry, James.
The inflation figures out today were a sort of, or out on Monday, were a 30-year high. So this is really starting to hit home for a lot of people, and we're seeing the price of food go up. We're seeing disposable incomes drop, which has, a massive effect on how we all live our lives. And it's got me thinking about one of the foundational quotes from Discworld. This is probably the most cited piece of writing that Terry Pratchett has ever done. It's from the first police series novel that he wrote, and it's about the idea of poverty being perpetual. So the character of Captain Vimes here is talking about his ability to buy a good pair of boots that's going to last him a long time. So take boots, for example. He earned $38 a month plus allowances. A really good pair of leather boots cost $50, but an affordable pair of boots, which were sort of okay for a season or two and then leaked like hell when the cardboard gave out, cost about $10. Those were the kind of boots Vimes always bought and wore until the soles were so thin that he could tell where he was in the Ankh-Morpork streets on a foggy night by the feel of the cobbles. But the thing was that good boots lasted for years and years. A man who could afford $50 had a pair of boots that'd still keep his feet dry in 10 years' time, while a poor man could only afford cheap boots, would have spent hundreds of dollars on boots in the same time and would still have wet feet. This was Captain Samuel Vimes' boots theory of socioeconomic unfairness. And I think about this so often because it says so much about our ability to sort of lift ourselves out of poverty. And similar to the Money River chat as had a couple of episodes ago, it breaks down this false equivalency that people put on raising yourself up by your bootstraps. Ha ha ha.
Hey. Okay, a couple of things in response to that though, CV. One being that, first of all, what we don't acknowledge in this boots theory is that the biggest impact of the boots situation is actually the load of the wet feet. So the amount of physical and mental energy that goes to thinking about wet feet and boots is almost worse than the boots situation itself. So the fact that this guy's thinking about buying boots all the time and has wet feet and has to deal with that during his day is as much of a disadvantage of his actual boots, and that's the kind of piece of poverty that goes unmissed for people. Like, why don't they make smarter decisions that I can think about while I'm sitting over here not in poverty theorizing about temporary poverty? It's like, because it chews up a lot of your bandwidth being broke. But the other thing that I've never noticed before in that particular passage, which I've seen a number of times, is the affordable boots cost a third of his monthly wages.
Yeah, the Terry Pratchett economies of scale and wages and the cost of various things in the book don't often add up. So I think it's probably best not to spend too much time on that because that's an inconsistency across the board in his book. So I don't think that's where the energy should go to.
I just noticed it. I was like, you want to talk about inflation? Bloody hell. The affordable boots.
the context of that is also for the majority of the series, it's a sort of pre-industrial economy. So there's not really very many luxury goods. So the percentage of an income spent on essentials is pretty high. But the other fascinating thing about that quote is that it's from the first of the sort of police series within the Discworld, and it's when we're still forming those characters. And it's really interesting to me that is the most famous thing to take away from Vimes, when actually the rest of the series, so at the end of that book, he marries into money, and spends every other cop novel deeply resenting his privilege. And in fact, he spends the rest of the series lusting for the boots that he can feel the cobbles through, because it connects him to the streets, it connects him to real police work. And his most hated item is his formal dress uniform with rivets and plumes that he has to wear. And he will sort of sneak out and buy a pair of cheap boots in order to reconnect. And, you know, that's a really interesting concept, is that that there is a nostalgia about poverty and connection in some ways.
So this is a dangerous segue for me here, and I'm not in any way trying to be Sam Vimes in the following story, nor am I trying to connect to poverty or anything like that, but I had that experience in New Zealand. So when I arrived here, I was surprised how much more expensive things were. And generally speaking, the cost of living here for a few consumable items was higher than what I was used to. My anchoring for how much things cost was a little bit skewed. And I needed to buy some new shoes. And I hate spending money on shoes. I don't like brand names. And I take a perverse pride sometimes in being anti-brand, because I'm a wanker like that. And I ended up buying these quite cheap shoes, which cost me the same as what my Adidas shoes in Australia cost a couple of years earlier, ignoring inflation, different dollar values, and just the different scale of things here. So I bought a pair of shit shoes, and sure enough, 4 months into owning them, the soles gave out and they were crap. And I still haven't thrown them out because I hate that kind of consumerism. I made a terrible shoe purchase choice, and I'm paying the Sam Vimes price right now. Like, I wasted my money buying those shoes. I bought a better pair of shoes the next time, and they are in far better condition 6 months later than these crap shoes that I paid, I don't know, half or 2/3 as much for. So I've got a tiny toe in the shallow end of lived experience for the Sam Vimes boots.
Well, the best part of that being that actually the best shoes you own are the leather sneakers we picked up from the op shop in Christchurch. Over
paid the same price for the leather shoes in an op shop as I did for those cheap runners that have given out long ago. And it was like $60 for a pair of shoes in an op shop. That is a joke. And Alec, who for a meaningless segue is one of the kids in Auckland about to enjoy the concert, said to me, "Nah, they're a good brand, mate, and they're leather. You should buy those." And I did, and I don't regret it at all.
Poverty nostalgia is an interesting idea, though, isn't it, CV? Where this, and I've like, you hear this a lot when people begin to appreciate the pressures of the reality of a more privileged life, whether that's because they've got like a stressful job or they've got a family or whatever that is. They go, "Oh, it was so great when I was young, and, you know, we just slept on a mattress and we didn't have much, but we didn't need to, you know, things were simpler then, things were better then." And this kind of harking back to a better, poorer time. A couple of things I've noticed about those circumstances tend to be that it's when poverty was quite temporary or a lifestyle choice. Like, I lived a middle class childhood, and then I had a couple of years as a broke student where I really felt like I changed my life, or I went traveling and didn't have much, and while I traveled the world, I only had a backpack, gosh, and then I came into my job that I was always going to go into and had a good life. So it's either a temporary piece of poverty that's like a novelty factor inside of a life that's actually been okay, or it's a reflection on the complexity and pressure that comes with an increase in means rather than wanting shit boots. And I've read this amazing book. I should have run out to the lounge and grabbed it, actually. When we went on our little jaunt last week, we stopped in Booktown in Featherston, which is marvellous. And one of the books I picked up was a book published in the early 60s. And it was 10 case studies of people living in London who were the new rich and the new poor. And the introduction to the book was talking about how in the last 100 years, things have changed so much. And that was the 100 years prior to the early 60s. And it was just profiling the lives of people in various professions and what their expenses were and what their expectations were. And at the end of the book, I think what struck me the most about it was just how socially located our quality of living standards and spending choices are. Because it's a really easy criticism for boomers on Facebook to be like, we didn't have these flat screen TVs and these smartphones. We just had a vegetable garden and gumption, and that's what got us through, or whatever they say when they're criticizing people whinging about genuinely shit living conditions. And sure, but you didn't need a smartphone to get through life. I mean, my not having time example or flying example is that the prerequisites for what it takes to be a participant in society and the economy shift over time. And it's really unhelpful to do that kind of false equivalency about what things were like in a different time, because you didn't need those things to have a job.
Oh, and the tweet that summarized this best, which I shared with you the other day, was someone saying, I was happy when I was 18. I mean, I wasn't, but I thought I was.
Yeah, 100%. And so, like, most nostalgia is a lie, but poverty nostalgia absolutely has to be the biggest lie of all, does it not, CV?
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I mean, that's the nature of nostalgia, right? It's nostalgia is a separate feeling from remembrance. So you can remember something and be not at all nostalgic about it. You can have zero affiliation with it, but nostalgia, you go into this different part of your brain, I think, when you're being nostalgic.
Well, yeah, and it's that kind of you can't really even trust your own memory. What's that book that talks about the peak end rule? I can't remember which book it is, but it basically talks about how your memory, when it decides to suck out the material facts from an event and store it, it will suck out the peak of that particular experience and the end.
But isn't it not just the peak? So depending on the person, some people have a predilection for what they remember of events. So some people have a naturally positive bias. Some people have a negative bias. Some people might have, like, it might be as nuanced as you like. And one of the jokes that we have is that, like, oh, I'm Cam, I'm fine. And even when I'm not, I still am. Because my brain kind of does that. My brain's good at just remembering good things and minimizing bad ones. And when you think about earlier episodes in your life, yeah, the only things I tend to remember are the peak and the end. You're right.
Oh, even from a day. So we'll get to the end of the day and Cam will sum up the day in this lovely way that he does, which is actually a really sweet thing. And he'll say, oh, it was so nice to have a lovely day with you today. I really enjoyed our time together. And I'll be like, what are you talking about? We were literally fighting for 7 hours today. And I'll be like, oh, but we had a nice dinner. So it's a really useful device, actually.
Very happy to have our relationship snapshot summarized thus. We fought for 7 hours. We had a nice dinner. What's your bias, CV? How do you tend to remember things?
I mean, I've been thinking about the poverty romance thing, and I definitely am the cliche as described before about going backpacking and having a very romantic idea of getting down to my last $50 that I had in the world, and I'd actually borrowed some money from a friend in order to fuel the last couple of days of travel before I crashed home to my parents where I had, resources. And yeah, there is that romance about it. And if I had to carry on into the next week, month, year with those kind of conditions, that I would not remember it as fondly as I do. But yeah, there's a couple of moments in my life where I've had that sense of travel that's real travel, where everything you own is with you. So when I moved to Melbourne, I took a small detour to Nepal, and everything I had with me was everything I had. I'd given everything else away. I was in this transition space. Yeah, you've still got my plates.
Love those plates.
And it was just a joyously light feeling. And I think that's possibly what the travel poverty nostalgia is really nostalgic for, is the freedom of it.
Yeah.
Oh, and I remember I went to New York with Greg we had this idea of not recreating, but doing the kind of trip that we used to do 10 or 15 years earlier. And we get to New York and we did have a great time, but the things that we enjoyed 15 years earlier were no longer enjoyable. And so there's a danger of like chasing something that was genuinely fun at the time due to your life circumstances. And then if you try to recreate it or believe that you would still enjoy it again, pretty risky. Like, we had a good time, but for different reasons. We had to change plans because the things that we thought we were going to love doing, we were like, nah, this is shit. I hate all these young dickheads at this festival.
Well, two reasons I know that's true. One is that I recently tried to go back to Mickey Finn's in Christchurch, which I believe you've also spent some time in recently, CV. That was the bar of choice in my bogan late teens. And I did not, sorry, Mickey Finn's, but I did not enjoy that at all in the last year. And the second one is every time I hang out with people in their early 20s, because I basically think I pretty much am in my early 20s because I'm in my early 30s. And then I spend half an hour with somebody under the age of 22 and I'm like, no. I'm not like these people at all. And quite frankly, pleased about it. And could I have a cup of tea and could we go home, please?
Well, I think we can round it out with this lovely little quote that Steve sent in, a verse from the song Sunscreen. I don't know the artist. Be careful whose advice you buy, but be patient with those who supply it.
Oh.
Advice is a form of nostalgia. Dispensing it is a way of fishing the past from the disposal, wiping it off, painting over the ugly parts, and recycling it for more than it's worth.
Steve, that's pretty excellent as far as a quote goes. That is magnificent. Is that the song that says always wear sunscreen? Maybe you have children, maybe you don't. Maybe you dance the funky chicken at your 50th wedding anniversary. Is that from that song, CV? Are you familiar?
I think it is, is, and I think that comes from Baz Luhrmann, who, of course, directed your favorite movie, Elvis. So that's a nice round.
Come on in.
Round out.
And as a light-hearted alternative point to the boots theory, one of the trendiest items for children to own currently is called an oodie, OODIE, which is basically a wearable blanket with arms and a hood. And they're horrendously expensive, and all the children want one, and they're all like $100. And this week, Harriet purchased for herself from Kmart a knockoff oodie. And Harriet, how much was the oodie that you bought from Kmart this week? Can you remember? $22, not $100. And are you just as happy with your $22 oodie?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which just goes to show that sometimes what we're buying is not quality at all, but hype, brand, and bullshit.
That's going to last 2 months instead of 3 years, but the fat will be over by then.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Brilliant.
You wouldn't buy a high-quality fidget spinner, would you? All right. Harriet has now woken up and joined us for the day, which is an excellent segue for us to say happy Friday, everybody, and to go and enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend. Thank you for joining us here today on the Alicia Mackay Show while we, I guess, shift from whinging about first world privilege into then contemplating genuine poverty, the nostalgia we have for it, and whether or not that's a legitimate emotion to have in today's overinflated environments. Go and enjoy your weekend, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you back here next week. Ka kite.